Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is October 18, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Please subscribe. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Francis Cisco Bradley, part two. Thank you, Cisco. Where are you calling in from?
From Manhattan in New York City.
How cool is that? We covered a lot in part one. I appreciated your time and energy then. You know, a screenwriting teacher said a great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a book?
Yeah, that's interesting. In my creative process, I think I usually have the maybe the big idea in my head to a degree, but how I get there and how I build towards that, I think is unknown. It becomes known kind of through the process. To me, it's all about the process of um, working through the material that I'm looking at, uh, and in the course of that process, I learn a lot about what I don't know, and maybe what I need to know or need to learn about, um, and um, you know, uh, kind of, kind of allowing, trusting the process to kind of get me there, I guess. So,
Yeah,
um, you know, allowing myself to wander a bit, and I mean wander in the best of ways. Being, becoming interested in new things, noticing new details, stuff like that, where I feel like I can be open to changing from the course that I originally probably saw myself following. So I think it's important to do that, to be able to improvise a bit and to shift from one thing to the next, as it comes, through the writing process.
it's really good. I appreciate it. Evoke two things. You know, Milan Kundera and Unbearable Likeness of Being said, this is why I love writing, because the character that I'm writing about can go further than I can. Yeah, well, that sounds really romantic, but if I put something down on paper with pen, how can it go further? So you're sort of saying, you know, you're trusting that process of wandering and it will take you further, even though the processes of you putting down words on paper. And then this critic, uh, poet critic Helen Vendler, she just died. She says, I write to explain things to myself. So I don't know if
Yeah,
either of those evoke more. I mean, you were pretty articulate about explaining your answer to the questions.
well, yeah, and as a side note, I'm sorry, there's a little construction happening next door. So if you're hearing any banging, unfortunately that's just in the background here. Some hammering is happening. Anyway, yeah, I think writing can be kind of a selfish process in that regard. That you kind of, I feel like as a writer, I usually have some sort of curiosities in my head that I want to satisfy through the process. I hope readers find that, satisfying as well. Though, I imagine sometimes the directions I go might not be what every reader wants, but
Yeah.
that's how writing goes. Um, you can't go in all directions at once, and you may take turns through the course of it that others might have wanted to go in a different direction or something, in the reading of it. But yeah, I do think, in a way, I think it's weird because I'm a historian. I write, obviously I write nonfiction, as we call it, but I think it's my imagination that leads me into those stories and into those histories, because I'm always wondering about these other worlds that I didn't get to see myself, or maybe I saw part of depending on the project. But realizing that there's lots of other things that happened beyond my experience, and finding those really interesting, and trying to picture those as much as possible and bring those as clearly to the page as I can.
Yeah, you really anticipated much where we're going to go into, but just an aside about the noise, don't worry about it. When I interviewed George Clinton many years ago with all these same questions, it was in his house in they were doing construction on the roof. So here's the guy tear the roof off the mother sucker. In the whole interview, you hear, you know. So it's just we can deal with the noise and you being into experimental music. They call it noise music. So no worries at all. But you anticipated the next question is Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your book?
I mean, I naturally think of the reader. It's a balance. I mean, it is a personal. I mean, um, I think it is a personal journey the way that I write.
Yeah.
But I always write with the hopes that other people that it can be a shared experience. So, I guess I try to make the worlds come alive in a way that won't just make sense to me, but it will hopefully also make sense to other people.
Yeah.
And try to point to and illuminate the things that are of importance to a broad range of people.
Yeah. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth, shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid, and even maybe non-tangible, say religion or philosophy, might extend consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? What humanness? Whether it's a pen or a keyboard.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I try to write um, with the sort of looking for the human in the
Yeah.
stories. Um, I like to get into their thoughts. I like to get into their perspectives, so that the story that I'm telling isn't just my story, but it's hopefully more their story, to try to really bring out the human qualities in the people that I write about. Um, I think some academic writing, I think, has the sort of underlying goal of turning people into theories, or and I think theories can be controlled more. I don't try to ever control the subjects that I write about, but I have the hope of conveying people's humanity through the writing, and I think that is more interesting. At least it is to me.
Yeah.
You know, there are some academics that I think would probably disagree with me, but I guess I'm a bit skeptical of people who kind of jump right on to kind of theorizing humanity without, if we can't see the the emotional nature of the human that's in the story, or see their trials and tribulations, or see their triumphs and their defeats. I think those things are all more important than what that human might represent in an abstract way. So,
no, that was good. That was really good, Cisco, because he evoked two things. Donald Thiel said McLuhan teased people to believe his percepts were concepts. So McLuhan's in academia, and you're supposed to do concepts. And he was saying, no, he was teasing people that his percepts, his perception, which was just intuition, guesses, were concepts. So that's why he's chalked off as a charlatan. And the other thing you evoked was Sun Ra going, it's his story, it's not my story, when they talk about history. But What's the difference between art and science?
Art and science. I mean, I think. I mean, science, in theory, is supposed to be the pursuit of some kind of truth, or if it's not truth, it's some sort of certainties that we can get to by measuring, by examining, by observing. Um, Art to me is about um, expressing something that's expressing or illuminating something about the world. And I think if art's done right, it's hopefully allowing us to see something new that we haven't seen before, or heard, or tasted, or felt, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think of Anthony Braxton's statement, and I'm paraphrasing, where he talks about art as also the pursuit of discovery. That he thinks of, especially sort of things that are situated in the avant-garde, as that there are discoveries to be made through art.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it right, that means you're really pursuing something new, something unseen, something that people haven't experienced before. And so maybe art and science meet that way. But I love Braxton's kind of imagination and the seriousness like of that pursuit, where you're looking for the undiscovered. And so maybe art and science have some have a meeting point there.
Yeah, it's really good. You bring up all my heroes, man. Anthony Braxton, amazing. Because, Monk said music is math, and then you look at Anthony's scores and they look like mathematicians'
Yeah.
worksheets. So Jean Cocteau said art is science made clear. But here's the one from McLuhan that entails one of your main pursuits, which is history. Marshall said, when you push our paradigms back, we get history. When we push them forward, we get science. I'm curious any thoughts on that.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it is true. When we push our paradigms back, we do get history, because we're always kind of examining the past through the lens of the present. So, it's we can't really see the past without the present being a mitigating factor. Looking into the future, I mean, pushing paradigms forward. Yeah, I mean, in ways, I think that makes sense. But you could maybe say the same about art.
Yeah.
I mean, art should be futuristic in a way. I think it should be a way of envisioning, a way of revolting against the ways in which we have already been thinking or perceiving, towards maybe something that's more perceptive, or perceptive in a new way or in a different way.
Yeah, like seeing new things, new territories with new eyes. McLuhan also talking about the interior landscape in 69 said James Joyce has solved problems which science has not yet formulated as problems. And that reminds me of Tony Conrad, another great experimental musician, said artists break rules that haven't even been made yet. So it's sort of like this pursuit of what you're saying, illuminate the world and see it with new eyes. And so I'm curious, your pursuit into history kind of entails what I've been studying is the word archive. And it came about in 1400s as to keep safe from harm, but then in 1600, 200 years later, it was what we think of archiving as record preserved as evidence. But the poet Charles Baudelaire said, if you try to make a statement that's long, deep, and rich, it will age very fast. If you try to only own the day you're talking, it will last forever. Kind of reminds me of David Lee Roth, here today, gone later today. But it's sort of like this thing, what, the question basically, I got a little more setup, but the two questions is archiving more innate or more invented? And do you have plans for your own archive? Because, if you study Eastern philosophy, like Ram Dass says, be here now, live in the moment. Wyndham Lewis says, artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. So why do we have to save stuff if the whole point of life is to live in the moment? The Egyptians kept stuff in their coffin with them, but I know it's evident we want to study history. I mean, your books are amazing histories of jazz movements that are normally ignored. So that's important. But do you think this need or want to archive is more innate or more invented?
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I was thinking of your question of how of why think about history, or why, if the goal is to live in the moment. I think if we live in the moment of our surroundings, past and the potential future, then in a way I feel like it's a hollow kind of life. Um, Archiving, saving things, is our tether to the past. I've done a tremendous amount of archiving in my life, in ways that I, 15 years ago wouldn't have been able to anticipate. Um, Not only do I interview a lot of musicians, and I've done that, I've done a lot of that over the past 11 years, maybe about, I don't know, close to 500 interviews that I've conducted. Um, Not only do we have their words, but we have their voices.
Yeah.
How they sounded, how they spoke about things, their intonation. I don't know. I think all of that brings out very human qualities. And I think the reason why I do oral history archiving is that is in a way the most ephemeral record that we have. And once people are gone, we no longer that can just never be recovered. Um, Boxes of flyers or concert list, postings, or, diaries, or any of these other things can survive. But, to me, the oral history archiving that I do is aimed at kind of really preserving stuff, that otherwise, would be lost. And I think it's really valuable. It contains a lot of, insights into, not just into music or art, but living, ways of living, ways of rebelling, ways of, looking at the world that may have been different from the dominant narratives of the times in which, all these people lived. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's, especially maybe because I interview a lot of people working in the sort of avant-garde, free jazz, experimental, sort of areas of music. I think naturally a lot of them are rather rebellious against mainstream society. So that's also, I think, an invaluable record.
Yeah.
In that, it has a lot of people thinking about other ways of living or perceiving, that aren't going to be preserved generally, and maybe haven't been, those ideas haven't been spoken or broadcast loudly enough. So anyway, I think, alternative ways of being, I think, is really important. If especially if we're looking around at the world and thinking about, how precarious I think our existence is right now, and how some of the big choices I think society has made, unfortunately, haven't been good choices. So, how do we get on a better track? So, I think there's a certain kind of utilitarian, there's a utilitarian quality for art in my mind. That it doesn't have to, but it certainly can help us envision something better.
Yeah, like
So if we're
Joseph.
thinking,
Yeah. Joseph Boyce said, "Art makes living possible."
yeah,
Like it is amazing, but it is like you have all these records. You've done these tapes, or however format you've taped all these oral histories on. Are they in a college archive, or are they in a box in your house? Do you have plans for your own archive?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I do. I think maybe I haven't thought about it enough because I'm still haven't yet reached 50. I just turned 48 recently. But I definitely would find a way to preserve it. And I have some ongoing conversations that I've been having with, um, a couple of different institutions. I can't say anything about it yet because it's
No, but
all
that's good because
up in the air.
with Dan Morgenstern just dying and knowing that archive that he preserved, we just did
Yeah.
a tribute to him here in LA. And I mean, this is important, you know. And even though I'm, wondering and thinking, because I agree with the futurists, destroy all libraries and institutions, but I go to a library every day. So I like that they came up with the idea, but I don't really want to see it happen. But again, I do think there's one word you used. I was wondering if you could explain it. You says archiving it tethers to our past. What's another word for tether? What do you mean by tether to our past?
What makes us aware? It gives
Yeah,
us an awareness
yeah.
of the past, which can easily be forgotten, easily buried.
Yeah,
I mean, especially in this sort of modern high speed kind of existence.
yeah,
Also, I mean, like, to put, maybe to bring some other issues into this. I mean, I spent the last 5 years really, or the last 8 years to a degree, really interviewing a lot of older Black artists who, and we talk about. I mean, there are a lot of conversations about this. Sort of the inadequacy of public institutions in archiving, Black art, Black music,
yeah,
Black lives in general. So, I think, when we think about erasure and sort of forgetting, even astoundingly brilliant and accomplished Black artists sometimes are unfortunately very much under archived, under appreciated and underpreserved, in terms of their legacies. So, I think, I think about that a lot too. Um, I think it's kind of vitally. I kind of think of it as a call to arms in a way of trying to work really hard to not let you know uh, not let the work of really incredible artists somehow fade, or be
yeah.
lost.
No, it's
I
amazing.
do have some
Go ahead.
serious plans about preserving my archive. Been in conversation with a couple of institutions. I've been applying for grants to support those efforts, and hopefully I'll have some good news maybe within the year. I don't know, but
That's good.
um, the work goes on. So I just keep doing the work that I'm doing and hope at some point that there will be, you know, some real financial support to make it accessible to the public, have it
Yeah.
presented in a a sophisticated manner, and all of that.
Yeah, I got lucky. I got a lot of my audio cassettes over 30 years preserved, but a lot of my stuff is on archive.org and they just shut down a couple days ago and it's like, what? But
Yeah.
there this supposedly they'll come back on, but it's like scary because I don't have backup on all that stuff I put on archive.org, and there's a lot there. But
Yeah.
we are fortunate because a lot of filmmakers took up and made documentaries on Sun Ra and Cecil Taylor. And I wanted to go into Cecil for a second because one of my film heroes said his mantra is ignore yourself. Someone you brought up in part one, Jonas Mika, says there is no self-expression, and Cecil Taylor says I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art
Yeah.
making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have given you probably the opposite answer that I'm giving you now. I think I used to be quite entranced by the idea of self-expression, and obviously that it is an important component of art to a
Yeah,
degree. And I think, but sometimes I ask myself, are we talking about art of self-expression or self-obsession? And and I think I think great music and great art comes from something, and I think some of the greatest artists that I've ever witnessed or listened to or seen the work of are people who both have some kind of balance
yeah,
where they are rooted somehow very deeply in something that we might call tradition,
yeah,
simultaneously able to advance that tradition or to evolve it or to rebel against it. And something kind of comes through them that I think is part of something established or something from the past, but they're able to kind of mold it into something
yeah,
much greater. I mean, I think of Albert Eiler in this instance.
yeah,
Um, you know, on the one hand, his playing, I mean, there's certain aspects of his playing that actually seem incredibly traditional in a way.
yeah,
People don't think of it that way, but there's
yeah,
something very organic about it. There's something that he seems to kind of evoke a lot of different roots
yeah,
in his work, whether it's marching bands or New Orleans sort of jazz um, or even things like field shouts. I feel like that's all in his music, and then he's doing something that also is simultaneously very new and fresh and seems to be advancing forward. So I do think I think the great artists are able to do that somehow. So I think there is maybe a balance somewhere in all of that. I think one of the risks with experimental music is if someone really is trying to smash tradition or somehow really sever themselves from the past, I think it's much harder for people to understand what they're doing.
yeah.
And then maybe it also brings up the question of why are they doing that? So
Yeah,
and that's yeah.
what's driven him? Because I always said, the three guys, Captain Beefheart, Sun Ra, and Ornette, they went out naturally. Everybody else seems to go, oh, I kind of get
Mhm.
this. I can do that. Like Ornette came out of King Curtis, but he, like you said, that through line with Albert Eiler was so good. It was like whoop, whoop, and there's something going over. But the thing about being a vehicle or a muse, whatever, was James Brown's drummer, the architect of funk drumming. They go, "Where'd you get your sound?" He says, "I lived in Ohio next to a train track and a factory." So it was like boom, boom. And then Ginger Baker, they asked him, "Where'd you get your drum sound from?" He says, "I was in London when they were bombing." Boom, boom, boom,
Mhm.
boom, boom. So it's like, how much is this a reflection of your environment coming through you?
Right.
One guy from Negative Land gave me the best example. He said, uh, uh, Missy Elliott, the rap singer, they asked her, where'd you learn to sing? And she said, from car alarms. Not like it's usually from the church, but she said so it is amazing. the follow-up question, Cisco, is, and I appreciate how articulate and concise you are. The follow-up is, can art making be egoless?
That is a good question. Uh, I'm not sure I can answer that. I
Yeah.
think maybe it can be. Sometimes when I hear people say that they are attempting that, I'm not always convinced.
Yeah.
That they've actually done that. I do think of. I think I can talk about this. I think of some interviews that I did the last few years. I interviewed the poet John Sinclair very deeply.
I interviewed him with all these questions twice. Thank God you got him before he died. Yeah, very good. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, he talked about, and I think this was maybe more important for creating the creation of an arts community than maybe even the creation of art. But he talked about the process of annihilating the ego,
Yeah.
and of course, I mean, he did talk about, the in his case, from his perspective, the the use of something like LSD to annihilate you know, this sort of trumped up ego of feeling sort of special, and that you're special and maybe a little bit isolated, um, but the use of LSD to kind of annihilate the ego and to kind of tap into something that was deeper and kind of human and kind of connecting everybody. So I mean, I've thought a lot about that. I mean, and there are certainly other conversations I've had with people over the years, where people were talking about kind of having egoless types of music. We think of Ornette Coleman, some of his early philosophy really was to create uh, a a jazz group that was more democratic, maybe,
Yeah.
or egalitarian or equal. With the idea being that if you don't have a band leader and instead everyone's kind of on equal footing, the drummer is no longer there just to keep time, the bass player and so forth. The bass player could end up playing the melody, and maybe the saxophone is doing the rhythm or whatever. Um, so I think sometimes maybe it can be achieved like in a communal way in that kind of sense,
Yeah.
where you have people trying to create together where people are on equal footing. I've had conversations with William Parker about the same thing,
Yeah.
where he would maybe give musicians that he's working with a certain kind of sense of what he's aiming for, but he expects them to bring something of themselves to that encounter rather than him just telling people, okay, you need to play these notes and you need to play it in this style, which he would generally not do. But to try to get there as equal individuals, working towards a collective. So I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know about complete destruction of the ego, but I think there can be ways in which
Yeah.
maybe it's sort of like this idea of equal voices or equal participation that can have um, a way of mutual kind of art making, that I think
Mutuals.
could
Yeah.
take some steps towards that.
Mutual is a key word. So much you evoked. I just interviewed Napoleon Murphy Brock last week, who sang with Zappa for years, and he said he realized that, and Frank's thought of as an egomaniac, but he knew there were moments where he says, okay, this middle part, we're both going to improvise. And he was on equal ground with Frank. So Frank was working off of him and he was working off of Frank. And it was this mutual community that I think John Sinclair was talking about. One lady said a year ago, great art is egoless. And another woman said, great art has to be egoless. So it's a lot on what the word ego carries. And I'm so glad you brought up John Sinclair because he was one of my heroes. You know, his mom taught Michael Moore poetry in high school. They're all
Oh,
from my
really? I had no idea.
John Sinclair was my hero growing up in Flint, Michigan. But there's one more I want to tell you. Brad Maldau, that great pianist, was playing a concert with our friend Maura Smiley, a vocalist. And at the end, it was just a one off. At the end, he came up to her and says, "Your singing is egoless." And that was like, whoa, she really understood that as being an amazing compliment, even though it could come off as like, well, no, where is, you know, so
Right.
that was beautiful where you went with that. Um, what do you think the motive of the cave artist was? Indeed, we have some documentation, we feel, or we have some artifacts of cave art, but we really don't have cave music or cave dance documented. You know, in Herzog's film about cave art, they show you one of those flutes they found. So we can imagine through playing through it what it could be. But when I say what was the motive of the cave artists, I mean also what was the motive of the cave musicians and the cave dancers. Your guess or hunch.
Well, I mean, I think on some level, I guess cave art or cave music or cave dancing or uh, yeah, I imagine it represented something communal,
Yeah.
something that was a broader experience, and so people found value in it because it represented more than just one person. But I don't know. I mean, I don't actually, um, you know, it's hard for me to imagine what lives were like, whatever it is, 40,000 years ago or something, where people were doing that kind of thing. But I think um, representing maybe something of communal significance, I guess would be my
Yeah.
thought.
No,
Uh,
that's good.
and and I imagine early, very early, ancient, music, like whatever happened may have happened there. Um, that was a certain kind of formation of a community, maybe the celebration of a community, um, recognition of there being a community. Excuse
Yeah.
me. You know, which is kind of the foundational reason for art to exist in the first place. Communicate something between people,
Yeah.
and I think successful art says something, you know, says something that is universal, that goes beyond the individual, that you know enters into the collective consciousness in a way.
So well put, I agree. So McLuhan said in 57, the basic question is what's the difference between education and entertainment? Because you've been involved in both. In more so you're an educator and you're writing books to educate people, but I know you curate shows and produce shows
Mhm.
and you know, so he said it is misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other one pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Now, most people, I go into that and I say, okay, tell me what this means. Pleasing, teaching, and more effectively mean in the realms of entertainment and education. One guy goes, no, whatever displeases teaches more effectively. But that was a rarity. And it's sort of like, being in the experimental film world and music world myself, I know most people grab their eyes or ears and run for the door. So it is
Yeah.
like, is that teaching you something or is that pleasing you? So, any thoughts on that? The difference between education and entertainment?
Yeah. Well, I think entertainment can teach, but it certainly doesn't have to. And I don't know that it necessarily does it more effectively. I think you need to challenge people to educate, especially these days. I
Yeah.
think people formulate, or get kind of attached to particular ways of thinking and so forth at an earlier age. I think because we're sort of inundated with things. We're constantly having stuff come at us. So I think sometimes you really need to jostle people out of like the kind of monotony of that, or maybe even the stupor of that. In terms of people getting kind of pushed into thinking certain ways, and then kind of rejecting anything that challenges that position. So I don't know. Education, I think, is meant to be a challenge. I think it's also meant to be revolutionary. It should, expose people to new ideas, and I think also to other ways of thinking. So I don't know. Entertainment can do those things, but I think depends on what people are seeking from entertainment. Are people looking for something to allow them to escape from the present moment? I think that's common. And I'm not saying I have never done that myself. I mean, at the end of a really long day or something, maybe you want something that's entertaining and not challenging because your day's been challenging all day. So I don't know. I guess I think of Archie Shepp, making that statement, we are not entertainers, we are artists. I think of that statement where I think entertainment can be almost something that just sort of exists peacefully in the subconscious. And if that's what it's doing, then I don't think it's going to educate. And of course, he was talking about, kind of the role of musicians being there to please. And he didn't want to please. He wanted to, I think, challenge prevailing ways of thinking. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm suspicious of entertainment a lot of, though I think it has its uses.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Archie Shepp because he was truly one of my heroes. Have you interviewed Archie?
I have not, but I would love to do so.
I would love to, man. And two things. One of my favorite songs in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when in the mid 70s, late 70s, this is when we were hearing the most amazing avant-garde jazz. We heard Anthony Braxton. There was a great jazz series bringing all these people to campus. And my favorite song was Give Me My Money by Archie Shepp. I'm not sure if that's the title, but it's on that Impulse Sampler album. And it's like, give me my money, give me my money. All I want is my money. And we love that because eventually Frank Zappa brought out in the 80s Archie Shepp to play a solo during one of his songs. And he introduced Archie Shepp to all these rock kids. Here's Archie Shepp. He's from jazz, the music of the unemployed, which is an amazing statement because I imagine at that point, Archie Shepp was probably making his living being a teacher.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's that funny, like, conundrum of entertainment and education, because a lot of these people. I mean, did William Parker make his living? I mean, he's got this huge amount of albums. Did he make money off all that? Did he make his money being a teacher?
Yeah. Well, I think we commonly call it the music industry, but I would call it more the entertainment industry, because I think for artists who refuse to just be entertainers, I mean, maybe they're entertaining some people, but maybe if they're trying to do something else with their music or their art or whatever, then I think they can often face a lot of pushback, I think, from the so-called music industry, because they're not doing what the music industry wants, which is they're just there for the numbers. Music industry wants to sell records and want to make money. So I don't know. And a lot of, I would think most great artists probably didn't make the bulk of their money from their work. I mean, I
Well,
think,
it's interesting
um,
because we haven't talked about your feelings on Zappa, but I'll just tell you two things. When he was on David Letterman, he says, "I don't have any brown lipstick in my makeup kit." And, he said, in order to be in the music business, you have to sell your cock and your balls. So, I mean, he was one person who didn't really sell out, but
yeah.
some people go, yeah, I mean, he had two big band jazz albums that are amazing. And he said to, I don't know if you know this guy, Spoon Man. Um, anyways, he's a fringe musician, and he
Mhm.
kind of made it big. He played with Pete Seeger and in all these grunge bands, but he played with Zappa a little. And Frank said to him in the studio one day, he says, "You don't have a sold out bone in your body." So it's sort of like, you know, there's a lot to go in that, don't sell out, sneak in. And then Schrader says, the role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail. That's like, oh yeah, my art is so pure. I tried to sell out, but I failed. The next question, Cisco, and you can only go another 15 minutes. Is that right? Or what do you got time wise?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Sorry, could you say that again?
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
You say conviction?
Conviction, like being
Sorry.
convicted
Yeah,
to an
yeah,
idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was just it was breaking up a little bit. Conviction or compromise? I don't know that one is more important than the other. I think they both are required. I
Yeah.
think you just have to know when to lean one way and when to lean the other. Um, I feel like in the ego driven society that we live in today, most people would say conviction matters more, but I don't think that's actually true. I think conviction does matter, obviously, but we need to know when to compromise and sometimes how to compromise. I think it's a lost art a little bit, um, because we're dealing with. I mean, there's whatever I forget how many people, 7 billion people on the planet or whatever it is nowadays. Um, I think having an awareness for when you stand your ground, when you don't, I think is much needed these days. Yeah.
Yeah, 80% of people when I ask that question say conviction. So
Yeah.
Utah Phillips says anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Yeah, that's a question. Well, I think we all are,
Yeah.
but we can't expect everyone else. We can't expect everyone to agree, and we can't expect everyone else to follow the rules that we would want. So I think it's that's where compromise has to come into play. But you have to know when to stand on for something and when not, um, because maybe the best decision isn't always the most popular. So yeah,
Well, the word freedom etymologically breaks down to the exact same thing as anarchy. Freedom is giving oneself one's own laws. What does freedom mean to you now?
that is a question. I mean, I think um, how we define freedom in the U.S. a lot of the time in mainstream discourse, I think is deeply flawed. I mean, freedom or the right to do, the right to whatever, the right to, the freedom of religion. But then we see religious views being imposed on other people by policies sometimes. So that's not freedom of religion. That's the freedom for people to broadcast using a loudspeaker, maybe to broadcast their ideas or to enforce them on others. The right to bear arms. I mean, I think I mean, really, that's the right to have the potential to do violence to your neighbors. I mean, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Others might disagree, but um, this idea of sort of rights the rights to serve the ego. Like the freedom for the ego to kind of have what it wants. I think it's a flawed freedom. Um,
Well, that's amazing because it leads perfectly. And what's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
yeah. Well, I mean, I think uh, we don't think about responsibilities much. I think contemporarily, I think we think much more about rights. I have the right to do this or that, right to speech, right to religion, right to et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think we need to think a lot more about responsibilities. I think otherwise it's just empowering, whatever, 250 million egos in this country. Whereas we should be thinking a lot more about responsibilities to each other. Um, I mean, just to point at one sort of, awful, catastrophic, and seemingly continuous social problem we have in this country is school shootings.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the byproduct of us being obsessed with sort of certain kinds of rights, and also a lack of a sense of responsibility. Um,
Yeah.
Everyone's supposed to have certain rights. So every person over the age of 18 should be able to acquire a gun if they want to. That idea, then well, you end up with school, basically, defenseless children being murdered with regularity. I mean, that's to me is
Duh. Yeah.
shows something is deeply unhealthy. So
Yeah. That's like requiring all cops to have a camera on all the time. I'm like, well, why don't we develop a society where our peacekeepers are treating the other people humanely. They're not treating them humanely or nice because there's a camera on them. But most people will say, no, we got to have cop cameras on, but it's not going to do anything in the long run. But it's sort of like this false fear question I wanted to ask you. Where the government no, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. That's the socialist John Basil Barnhill. Then in 2005, V for Vendetta, the movie, paraphrased it. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. So the question, Cisco, is how do you personally handle false fears? Like the war on poverty or the war on terrorism, or the worst is the war on drugs. You can't say no to
Mhm.
drugs. Drugs don't talk, and you can't, have a war on drugs because drugs can't fight. So they create these false fears. How do you personally handle false fears?
I think on some sort of spiritual level, I overcame fear a long time ago,
Yeah,
and I think as a younger person, I was always very skeptical of fear. I wouldn't call it fear so much as control, in narratives of control that are being sort of spawned by people in positions of power
yeah,
to get other people to do things. So, um, I mean, I think the time that I faced it in, I think I faced it in multiple ways. Um, I can go back. I go back to the early 2000s. I can use a couple of just I think poignant examples. I mean, one, um, I was living in New York when the cops that shot Amadou Diallo were declared not guilty. They were
yeah,
acquitted.
yeah,
And I remember this was a life change, like kind of changing moment for me in terms of like thinking about society. My mother, and I love her, but I mean, she called me and she said, I was living in New York at the time. She said, you should be careful and stay away from black people. That's what she said to me. And I remember thinking, of how messed up that was. Like a sort of a double injustice, like an injustice has just been committed, and that's supposed to get me to fear the people who have been hit with this injustice.
Yeah.
That was a moment for me where I thought, no, I'm actually going to try to do the opposite. So I'm going to try to build community links and hear about people's perspectives. I'm not going to go and hide somewhere.
Yeah.
More so after 9/11, that was another one for me, where the sort of the paranoia, the use of fear to justify all kinds of things. A war in Iraq that we think maybe claimed the lives of maybe 1 million people or close to it. A lot of children. I mean, you think of all of the casualties of that war. It was only sold through fear, really. And I knew pretty quickly, I thought, what I'm getting, this idea that somehow now I'm supposed to fear Muslim people. Well, I have friends who are Muslim. I know that I don't need to fear them. So I could extrapolate that out and think I'm not going to fear Muslims in general, right? So I knew that was just a false fear. So I think kind of coming to that realization, I was, when 9/11 happened, I was 24 years old. So, I think I was still in kind of a formative stage of my life and thinking about kind of how I want to relate to the world. Well, if we can overcome, I felt like it was very necessary to overcome those fears. So, in 2003, I went and studied in a Muslim country to prove further to myself that the fears were unjustified. And I think it's good to be proactive and not let those fears settle in your brain or gestate. I of course had a wonderful time but I do remember before I left, people said things like, "Don't go there. They hate us and they will kill you." These are supposedly rational family members and people that I knew. So this is so ridiculous.
But it seems, Cisco, you were, according to part one, you were raised by great parents and relatives who taught you to be politically aware. And I think what your mom was saying is watch out for yourself, Cisco. She just added the word watch out for yourself for Black people. And that's like Lenny Bruce saying, when I was talking about the cameras on cops question, he says, you can call cops 3 things. You can call them cops, pigs, or peace officers. Well, why don't we just call them peace officers? Because that's what we want them to do, is keep peace and accentuate the word peace. That's William Blake. We become what we behold. So, that's the thing that you knew how to suss through what your family members were telling you, and not like turn them against you. And that same thing, they taught you to be an awareness independent thinker, and that's what you were doing. Well,
right. Yeah, well, I didn't, I'm not, I don't know. I can forgive my mother for saying that.
Yeah.
And I think she was acting out of concern, obviously. But I also could recognize that it was false fear at the time.
Yeah. It's amazing.
And it's moments like that kind of push me towards anti-racism work and anti-Islamophobia, sort of work in kind of along those lines. And I should say, I kind of went on, my PhD that I got was in Islamic history. So, I was serious about, kind of educating myself about these things and recognizing and trying to be proactive about it. So, and I feel like I've carried that spirit with me, to the present, whenever I can, in whatever ways I can.
That's really good. Well, Cisco, we did an hour. I'd love to do a part 3 because we still got lots more questions. Can you do a couple more now, or you want to plan a part 3?
Sure, we can do a couple more.
Okay.
And we
And
do a couple more, and then we
then
can always do a part 3.
yeah, 3 or 4 months down the line, no hurry. So T.S.
Okay.
Eliot said, "Poetry is outing your inner dialogue." What language is your inner dialogue in?
I think it's changed over the course of my life. I think it's usually a steady, calm voice, generally. I think I used to be more, I don't know, impetuous, or I used to be more hot-headed in a way. I think now, when I find myself in moments of crisis or tension or chaos, I feel like I get very calm.
Wow.
And I don't know, maybe that's I hope that's some kind of wisdom, but
How'd you acquire that? How did that change come about? Any ideas?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a certain kind of confidence, or,
Yeah.
I've been in truly, I lived in a war zone. I visited another one, and I think you experience something like that, and it puts a lot of smaller fears or agitations in perspective.
Yeah.
So I find that it can calm me, I think, knowing that say the present situation I'm in is maybe not as bad as some people think it is.
Yeah. It's
Um,
good.
you know, yeah.
Yeah, that confidence is an important word. In fact, someone in your neck of the woods, a great experimental filmmaker, Abigail Childs, I says, "What language is your inner dialogue in?" And she said, "I wish I knew."
Yeah.
So I appreciate you having confidence and being able to articulate it. Okay, well, let's close out with this one. Is perception reality?
Uh, no. I do think it's a vantage point at reality. So I think, that what we can hope, I think, is to not be blinded by our own perception only. I mean,
Yeah,
it's good to be aware of your perception, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, but also to recognize that other perceptions are different. So I think, to me, that's education. That's what learning is.
yeah,
It's learning how other people perceive. That's why I'm interested in art. I might look at something and think very differently from another person.
yeah,
Um, and neither one of those might be right. One of them might be more perceptive or more interesting or more, deeply thought out. So I don't know. I think that's why I'm attracted to people, because especially startling um, artistic visions, you know, from the great artists, I think give you a lot to think about. They challenge your own maybe limited perception on something, and that is close to as we can get to enlightenment. I think is by
yeah.
considering
I
these other perspectives.
Yeah,
You know.
consider him. I agree. A guy went backstage at a Sun Ra concert and said, "Dude, my kid could do that. Bang on a piano." And he goes, "Yeah, but can he transcribe it?" And in George Clinton, they asked when they asked George Clinton, "What kind of music do you like?" He says, "The kind of music that pisses me off, and I'm trying to figure out why would it piss me off." I mean, music is this pure art form. Why would something piss you off? Then I want to get in touch with that. I can listen to the music I like, but why would something as pure as music piss someone off? I think great art is it fucks your shit up, and then you can go home and go, I can do that, you know. And I mean all
Well,
these yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I used to say this. I don't know if I still agree with this, but I used to say angry music makes me happy. Happy music makes me
Yeah,
angry, and
yeah,
that something about like high energy kind of music that would make me feel almost
yeah,
like a kind of catharsis. And maybe that's still true to a degree.
Yeah.
I think, I think going through, whether it's, like sort of personal crises at certain moments in my life, or going, experiencing tragedy, I think has made me actually more, more open to happy music, maybe. But
Yeah.
there is something about, there's some kinds of music that push me out of my comfort zone, and that's what I'm looking for
Yeah.
the most part.
Yeah, it's really keeping an open mind, and but don't keep it so
Yeah.
open your brain leaks out. That's what the old proverb goes. But Cisco, what a pleasure talking to you again. I hope in
Yeah.
part three we can get deeper into music itself and a lot more. But
Sure.
I really appreciate your time and energy. And even though I'm going to hit
Yeah.
the end broadcast button, I hope this conversation never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm definitely open to it. So yeah, let's do it again.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Take care, Jerry. Thank you so much.
See you. Bye.